Welcome to the Help We Need podcast, where we explore topics that empower women and support their well-being. I'm your host, Fumike Moronkeji, and today we are on part 4 of our self-preparation tips for salary negotiation series, and we will be discussing the defense scenario. And our focus will be addressing your fears and challenges at the negotiation table with your manager, your supervisor, your boss, your significant other, your partner, what have you. But this is a salary negotiation, stipend negotiation, allowance negotiation discussion, because you need to up the game. And obviously, we're looking to do this in a way that is most beneficial. So I hope you've been able to connect back, because this is a series. We've had the part 1 where we've talked about not yet ready. So you're not yet ready to have the conversation for obvious reasons. You're not prepped up. You're not at that level, or you don't need to. That's completely okay. Part 2, we talked about I am ready, yes scenario. And obviously you're prepped up, we can do this. So in a sense, you're grounded. There has to be some form of structure. So we discussed, preparation tips to get you started. And part 3, we talked about how to do it scenarios. So now that we have the groundwork to kick off, how are you going to be having that conversation? Because it's really important. This is a conversation that can make you or break you. So it's important that you do that or have that conversation in a way that is most beneficial for you. So today, we will be, it's like a defense scenario, and most times defense is the best form of attack. So in this episode, I'll be sharing with you tips that set a good structure for actioning the negotiation discussions to enhance your success and career at work, obviously for the better. So we would address the challenges to expect once you begin the conversations with your manager. And I believe that the best case scenario always is for you to leave that negotiation room or table smiling and happy with yourself. And hopefully that's what you get to. But what if you don't exactly leave that conversation smiling? So it's important that you understand what would trigger that and also be prepared for it. So we're focusing on your defense to manage your expectations during the meeting. And after all that's been said and done, it's important for you to understand that there will be some aha moments or challenges that you will face. So I hope that this episode helps you to address those concerns, or at least identify the challenges you anticipate you will encounter, because it's important that you do this so you're able to gauge how you would be able to tackle them, right? Once you speak with your manager or your employer. More importantly, I also think it's important to call out that you will need to address how to take this conversation that you'll be having, hopefully, to keep your head above the waters, during the discussions, because you need to earn your manager's respect and appreciation for how you handled the conversation, no matter how it turns out. And you need to keep your job. Hopefully, if that's the aim, you need to keep your job to ensure you continuously, even while you're having these conversations, express your motivation, your enthusiasm, your excitement for the role, and, your continued interest in the role and, prospects for career growth. Now, before we start off on the tips, I need you to also understand, at least if I'm speaking to women that are just trying to get this going and have this conversation for the first time. Or maybe you've had the conversation in the past and it didn't really go well. Maybe it was with a different manager. Maybe it was with a different supervisor. But I think it's helpful to just understand that this is a change, not just for you, but also for your manager. If you've not particularly had this conversation with them before, it's going to be a surprise. And it may trigger certain responses because they may not necessarily be sure, or you may not also be sure how they respond to what you say. So it's important that you understand, as much as this is something very important for you to address, your manager is in the room as well and would also want to ensure that they manage your expectations, hopefully in a way that is also realistic. And hopefully you don't have a manager that overpromises and undersells. So it all depends on how they react to what you say, and it all depends on the level of expertise of your manager or supervisor as well. So, I mean, we continually said over and over again, timing, you need to gauge when to have these conversations, make sure it's at the right time, make sure it's kind of connected to when your manager is happy with your performance, with what you're doing and all that. But you can't overplan, right? Because there would be some things that would creep up, or just mannerisms or predispositions. So obviously, we've also said you need to maintain professionalism. If you listened to part 3 of our podcast on the same topic, please go and listen to it if you've not. So at least you get those tips as best as you can before we move on, or you move on with the final steps. Each part of this series, while you may think it's not for me because it doesn't necessarily connect with what you want to do, I think the whole series is important for you to listen to, so you get the breadth and the length or depth of the tips, and you adapt to align them as appropriate. So I hope this is helpful. Okay, so let's kick off. Let's get going. So the first challenge that you should anticipate you would have, and it's not necessarily in the order of first, second, third, right? But it's just the first points that I'm making, is manager constraints, right? So what does this mean? So how your manager responds to you in terms of their reaction of what you've requested for something, and obviously expecting a form of response in exchange. And it may come in several ways. So you could get a lowball offer. And what do I mean by that? There could just be a small increase that has been offered, as opposed to the increase you are anticipating that you would get. And the manager may agree to give you a raise, but the raise may not meet your expectation, right? And this could stem from budget limitations to organizational policies within the organization. The manager will hopefully let you know why they're suggesting a lesser increase in salary as opposed to what you're expecting. So this is something that you need to be mindful of, because you shouldn't expect that it's exactly what I say that's going to happen. So you should give yourself some buffer. While you've shared the data points, you also need to know that you're working with an organization that is unique, that runs a financial process, that their policies, there's so many indices. So you need to be mindful of. But this is something that may pop up. So you may not exactly get what you want. But hey, it's better than nothing. So, but it's important that you note that, and also try and understand why they're not giving you a low increase, for example. Understand why this has been proposed. Another objection, maybe under the manager constraints, would be maybe budget constraints. And I know we spoke to that earlier on. And this is where the manager may likely explain to you that maybe the company is operating under very strict financial restrictions, what have you. There's little room to maneuver. So, giving you a salary adjustment is an uphill task. And it all depends. They may say no. And while we've mentioned timing issues may still pop in. It may seem like a good time, but for whatever reason, the manager may argue, may counter your timing to say that it's not a good time. They may cite reasons like maybe there's which you may not be aware of, and you may be, or you didn't factor that into the conversation. Things like there's going to be an organizational review of structures, or that's currently going on. This is not the right time to be having this conversation. So that's why it's so important for you to understand the pulse within the organization. And if you do have to ask, nonetheless, because maybe you can't wait any longer, maybe you need to go and leave, whatever reasons, maybe you are planning to go on maternity leave, I don't know what the situation may be, they would let you know it's not a good time for whatever reason. Maybe there's a financial downturn in terms of maybe economical, political, whatever reasons. Your manager will definitely share these reasons with you. So again, from a manager constraint perspective, salary increase offered might be lower than what you're expecting. It might be a no because there are budget constraints. It might be a no because the timing within the organization to effectively get this done, it's just not it. It is not the right time. So be mindful. Okay. So another challenge, which I would refer to as maybe challenge 2, would be, there's a specific challenge from an employee perspective, and that would mean that the manager is not particularly okay to do this because the manager sees your performance from a different lens, right? This is you thinking you are doing exceptionally well, and they are comparing you with maybe your peers within the department or the function, and they're not quite really aligned with your definition of you're doing well, you're taking on more than what has been bargained, and this may leave you feeling very discouraged. So that may be a reason why they say no, outrightly no. And I don't know what the situation also is like, but maybe a reason could be you have a tendency for voicing out your concerns around your salary before the conversation itself. So it's well known that you're always complaining. And to the manager, it gives them a perspective about you to say this person is always whining, and that might leave a bad taste, right? And for them, they've already prejudged you and they don't think you're engaged, and they don't feel like if you're not engaged, they're just waiting for you to leave. So your behavior within the organization, it matters how you're showing up. It matters how people are perceiving you, whether it's your manager or the managers or the colleagues within the organization. So in a sense, you need to also be mindful that this may show up at the discussion table. So there are a number of reasons that the manager may say no, and these are just some reasons why they may say no. And another thing to also reflect upon when it comes to specific challenges from an employee perspective could be now more on your manager than on you. And where you have a manager that is attacking your personality, the conversation, because they're like looking at you and thinking, how dare you ask for a salary increase? How dare you, like, who do you think you are? And unfortunately, yeah, there are managers who feel like you don't have the right. They are the ones that they say whether you get a salary increase, it's not you. And unfortunately, the remarks they make or they may make at the discussion table would, they would definitely not be that good, to be, to say the least, in terms of them targeting your personality, your demeanor, you're always so soft spoken. How in the world would you even consider exploring a possibility of growing in your role when you've not demonstrated a personality that is get going, that is of a manager quality? And as opposed to focusing on your performance, they're taking a different angle to this. I'm not saying it's the right way to do it, but you need to be mindful that it could happen. And when it does happen, obviously it's a negative remark, it's not professional. That could trigger emotions. And it's important that if this does happen, you remain calm. And we'll speak to that much later. But these are things that you also need to be mindful of in terms of, now that this has happened, what are you going to do about it? And I think it's important that you steer the conversations back to letting them focus on the facts, and that your personality of either being soft-spoken is not a reflection of underperformance. This is just who you are, right? And this does not in any way affect your performance in terms of what you're doing on the job. So as much as possible, your response should, just lean in on the facts and completely ignore the rude behavior if you can, try and do that. And, or just let them know that, well, it's helpful that you get their perspective. You didn't know that this was the way they saw you as a person, but this is not who you are. And, restate your value, restate the commitment to the job, restate your contributions, restate the impact you're making within the team and the organization, and try and be as civil as possible, right, as you can. And another thing that you should anticipate that could pop up from an employee specific challenge perspective would be the comparison to other colleagues, right? So the manager may compare you, your request, and say, you know what, once I start this, there's going to be an avalanche. Everybody's going to be coming and asking for a salary increase. Or they may indicate that your contributions are not as, well known as your counterparts, right? And this obviously would undermine your confidence, because you would expect that they stay focused on the objective, and they stay focused on who you are as an individual and the contributions you bring to the table. And once this starts, I think it's important for you to try as much as you can to steer the conversations back again to yourself. And while you understand you're working with peers, your contribution to the table is what has led to X, Y, Z. You respect your peers, you appreciate their support within the team, but this is more around the value you bring to the table and your understanding of based again on your data points and your ability to justify that this is something she needs or he needs to look at, it's still not up to par. And, in a sense, standing your ground while maintaining your composure, and, you smile, thank them for the feedback, but, you disagree. These are careful ways you can maneuver through the conversation. But the beauty of this is once you anticipate that something like this could pop up and you train or re-ask for it, it makes it a bit easier as opposed to when it suddenly comes on you and you weren't prepared, and helps you be able to navigate the conversations better. So the third challenge would be the emotional dynamics, right? And with relationships, with conversations, I mean, there's always that level of emotion, whether you're within the organization or whether you are at home, wherever. Life is all about emotions. And I think it's first you trying to manage yourself, right? Because the fear of rejection shouldn't make you struggle or be so anxious that maybe you're not even willing to assert yourself, or you're so tensed during the conversations that it makes it so hard to advocate for yourself. So you need to be mindful of that, and you need to stay strong till the end. There was a reason for starting the conversation, for having the conversation. You cannot chicken out. So you need to at least stay true to the objective of the differential, to say that it doesn't make you feel like you're being valued for the work you do. While you understand their support, you understand you're working with the teams, but knowing that you're doing this much and you are contributing this much, and someone else doing less within the industry is getting, at least as per standards, that much. And please ensure that while you're doing your benchmark, you are comparing apples to apples, because that's also equally important. If you are working, for example, in a pharmaceutical industry, do your homework. Make sure that you're comparing the salary ranges with the salary range of a company in a pharmaceutical industry within the same setup, within the same location, maybe within the same country. You need to make sure it is apple to apple comparison, so that at least holds strong for the justification of an increase when you're having that conversation. So just be mindful that the fear of rejection shouldn't hold you back, and the fear that there is a possibility that there will be a conflict with your manager should also not hold you back, right? The point is really being able to speak up, because it may be a not yet. It might not be a definite no. At least you have the courage to have the conversation, and also be mindful that maybe it's a waiting game, and your manager may not, and most times are not necessarily your managers forever. So it's either you are very calculative in how you are deciding to win the battle or lose the battle so you can win the war. So you need to be able to gauge that and decide at some point to say, okay, at least I had my voice out there. I came up in a way that was respectful, and I did my level best. And, consider what other options you have in terms of looking for other opportunities, either within the organization or outside of the organization. So the fear, again, of conflict or rejection should not hold you back. And then another key thing to call out, or key point, would be the unprofessional remarks, right? The comments that are made or the criticisms that your manager gives that completely strays away or derails the discussion. And it's also a strategy, right? Because they don't want to deal with it. They could look for something to say that would rattle you, so you get upset, and all objective of having that conversation is completely lost. And that's something that you need to make sure does not happen. So whatever unprofessional remarks they make, whether personal or otherwise, you need to understand that this is a game and your manager is also testing you. So just be composed, be respectful, and try your level at best to stay professional. So moving on to the fourth challenge, it's important to understand that your company is a factor in all of this, and you're not working in silos, right? So organizational factors is also very instrumental, and things to consider as you have these conversations. So you may have a company that have rigid policies, and hopefully you're familiar with your company policies when it comes to compensation, if your company is open to share that. And if not, then the manager will most likely be bringing that to your attention at the discussion table. So these policies or guidelines may be hand-holding your managers, and that may just be the reason why they're unable to do anything. And sometimes I find, at least based on my experience, that some managers would give it a try and they will come back with a definite no, because the powers at play have unfortunately, blocked whatever chances that looked promising or were available at the point of your discussions. And those guidelines, those inflexible salary structures within your organization may just be one reason why your request may not pull through. So these are things that you need to consider as you have these conversations, and be okay with it, because obviously there's nothing you can do about it, at least within that timing and that frame. But in terms of maybe being more long-term planning kind of mindset, then this is probably a time where you need to sit down and reflect on what would be the most best way to take things forward in terms of other opportunities that are available to you. So from an organizational factor perspective, another thing I think that also holds true as a concern would be equity and fairness, right? Because managers may, I would say, hesitate to offer the increase to you because they feel like if they offer the increase to you, other employees, other teams may feel unfairly treated. So if that is a concern that the manager is open to share with you, I think it's important to reinforce from your perspective confidentiality aspect of things, and you understanding that salary conversations are confidential, and you would be keeping those conversations or whatever conversations you will be having with your manager confidential. And also helping your manager understand that you feel it's only fair to be treated in an equitable manner for the work that you do, right? And the value you're bringing to the table. And I honestly feel like, depending on how the conversation goes and how you're able to hold that conversation, I think in a sense your manager should begin to understand that you are an employee who is at risk. And when I say at risk, from a manager perspective, they should start understanding that they could lose you. And if the awareness and understanding has not been there before, that's something they may start thinking about. But when managers start hesitating to offer increases because of they're not sure how they're able to maintain equity, it's you just helping them also reinforce their confidence and helping them, assess you from your own lens and stop the comparison trap, right? So that's something you could try and aim for, and maybe just highlight the contributions you bring into the organization. If your job is such that it's revenue driven, and maybe just remind them and just say, you hope to continue to do this, and you hope that you trust that your manager sees that, and based on that is able to continue to support your journey in terms of making sure that you are equitably paid. So I hope this helps. Conversations you'll be having is never one fixed formula, but if hopefully you get the framework right, then I think it should flow. But while you're having that conversation, I think it's also important that you manage your expectations, right? You are expecting that your salary will be increased or enhanced. That's the real objective behind our conversations for today. But over time, and even in my career, I have learned that the negotiation discussions may not necessarily happen the first time you have it, but just you continuously showing up and just continually outperforming year after year, maintaining momentum, being consistent, and obviously be smart about looking for options outside the organization, but you shouldn't let the ball drop. And just making sure that you're maintaining momentum, because when you do revisit the conversation again, speaking to your achievements, speaking to the targets, last year I made this year I've done twice as much. You need to ensure that you're consistent, and the manager obviously looks at the track record and sees that even with the no or not yet, it still is something that doesn't hinder your performance, and you're still doing the best possible level possible to own your craft. So, I mean, these conversations can be a bit tricky, especially when you're not getting, compensated for the work you do. And over time, you feel like this is so unnecessary, or this is a trap, or this is not going anywhere. And I think that's why you also need to start strategically thinking of other options that you can seize upon, so that if it's completely closed, then there's nothing stopping you from moving out and exploring other opportunities. And hopefully you find an employer that appreciates your craft, that would pay for your value, and you move. So please have this at the back of your mind, that, you're not cast in stone. You can always revisit the conversation. You can always revisit your plans, your prospects, the vision you have for yourself within the organization, or possibly outside the organization. And the reason also for the benchmark, in as much as you're exploring benefits, you're looking at salary ranges, you're also exploring market trends, you're also looking at standards, right? So hopefully during your exploratory experience, you get to see organizations that you value their culture. You get to identify organizations that pay equitably. You get to find organizations that would appreciate the value you bring to the table, and you get to explore those opportunities. So anyway, let's get back on point. Based on all that we've shared so far, it's so important, regardless of how the conversation turns out, that you end the conversation with appreciation, regardless of the outcome. You thank your manager, and you appreciate them for the opportunity to have the conversation. You are really keen to get their support in whatever way they can. And while this may come across as a bit maybe sudden, or you hope that they're able to think through it, and if possible you could reconvene, if that's something that you could also leverage. And your manager doesn't have to give you a response immediately, and you could connect again, maybe they think about it, and then you could have another conversation in terms of what would work best. So give them time. If they are not asking you to give them time, or you sense that they're a bit confused, and sometimes when people don't know what to do, they will first of all say no, or you sense their reluctance or they're struggling in terms of how they would respond to you, you can help them out and say, you know what, I appreciate the fact that you've given me room to speak. I don't expect that you would give me an outright answer now. And I know you need time to think more around what I've said and what have you. I'm happy for us to meet in a week's time, for us to, talk to this point again. So give them space to breathe, if possibly. That's what would work for that current scenario. But I think it's important also, hopefully, if you don't have a new manager on hand and you know your manager well, to be able to gauge how they would respond to you, to be able to gauge their level of expertise in terms of managerial experience. And I know sometimes, while it may sound funny, as employees, we also have the responsibility of managing our managers, right? So don't forget that, and help your manager out, even in the conversation. If you feel like they're struggling, to give them a way to kind of think about it, reconvene, and, maybe be able to be more prepared for how they would come back to you. But, at the end of the day, it's you either win or you don't win yet. And then at least you've started the conversation, you've put on the light, you've ignited that need for your manager to do their homework and get back to you. So I hope this has been helpful. Okay, so as we conclude this enlightening discussion, I do hope, and I sincerely hope that I always say this for all the episodes, but I do hope that it's not just sparked an awareness and a call to action, but the need for good preparation, right? Salary negotiation, as we know, is more than just a conversation about numbers. It's a statement of your self-worth, a push for equity, for managers start thinking in a way that they are rewarding you appropriately for the work you do. And it's also a step towards, dismantling the barriers that hold you back, because at least now you're able to speak. And the only thing that's held you back so far is you speaking up. If you're able to do that, then, there are better things ahead. So whether you work in a salon, whether you're a domestic helper, whether you teach, or you work in an educational sector, or you're in a blue collar or white collar job, or you're a homemaker, these tips can be adapted to suit your needs, right? With a good character and mannerisms, which is part of the ingredients, right? That is required alongside your good work ethics and your excellence of performance at what you do, I'm sure you will not be far away from meeting your target. Remember, when you're entering your first salary negotiation or you're advocating for yourself, you bring immense value to the table and you deserve to be compensated accordingly. So equip yourself with knowledge, lean on your allies, and never underestimate the power of your voice. Let's keep the momentum going. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you have not done so. And do please share this episode with a woman or a lady you know who might benefit from it. Get them to subscribe as well to this channel. And together, let's make salary negotiation a tool for empowerment and for change. Thank you for listening to the Hope Winning podcast. Stay tuned in for more episodes on living your best lives. And until next time, stay empowered and remember to empower her.